Hello, in this video I'm going to revisit a topic that I've already posted some videos about, and I'll put those links in description because there are a few videos they might seem separate, but they're actually all connected, and they have to do with weights and measures, some very important connections going back to the ancient world, and most specifically the Great Pyramid of Giza, and how the foot, the metre, the cubit, and when I say the foot, I mean various more recent, but as well as other ancient units of measurement, such as Greek, connect to even more ancient units of measure, such as the Royal Babylonian, the Mohenjo-Daro foot, and how all of these come together around a certain point, and how the Great Pyramid is one of these key points, and how the legacy of these ancient systems of measure have actually been passed on, and how the metre and the English foot are actually anything but modern. They're very ancient. It's quite testable, measurable, observable. It's a pattern which can be seen around the world. Now those links will be in the description. Especially, will they also connect to older legends such as the flood legend as told in the Epic of Gilgamesh, as well as New Jerusalem as described in Revelations in the Bible. This knowledge has been passed on, and it's been encoded in various forms in legend, in weights and measures that we still use today, most importantly the 24-hour clock of 86,400 seconds per day. What I'm posting, like the angle I've been going at is it's in a tangent to the established alternative, but I think that there are some errors made and that need to be addressed. But I'm also now going to be bringing some video by Alan Green, who one of his YouTube channels is the BARDCODE. I'll put the links to the description in there. Please subscribe, please watch. He has some amazing work, and we'll have a look at that now.
In 1859, John Taylor published The Great Pyramid. Why was it built? And who built it? He was the first person to notice that the very simple 14:11 ratio inherent in the basic proportions of the pyramid revealed to an extraordinary degree of accuracy pi and phi. In the century and a half since Taylor launched this most significant quest to prove that the Giza builders had prior knowledge of higher mathematics, Egyptologists still deny there's anything more than coincidence involved. But in a moment, you're going to see for the first time that this seventh wonder of the ancient world has no less than 12 of the most important mathematical constants embedded within its basic proportions: the diagonal, the base, the half base, the side slope, the height, and the corner slope. Now, I'm using just the basic units generally acknowledged to be the original measurements the builders used in royal cubits: 220 half base, 440 base, 280 height. With these basic numbers, the side angle is inevitably 51.843, and these other measurements all follow simply by applying Pythagorean theory. Now, don't panic. I'm well aware that many people have the following reaction when confronted with mathematics. But I'm going to spare you for now. Everything you're going to see is documented in minute detail on a dedicated YouTube channel, so the true nerds amongst us can triple-check the math to their heart's content. The rest of us can relax, just enjoy the ride. So let's get into it. Here's the square root of 2. It's the only one that doesn't involve any proportion beyond the base, so by definition it's 100% accurate. Here's where we find pi. If we add these two diagonals, we get the Euler-Mascheroni constant. It wasn't discovered until 1734. What happens when you invert that? Square root of 3. This is square root of 6, square root of 5. Here's Brun's constant, not discovered until 1919, hugely significant in the field of prime numbers. Here's the Fibonacci constant, derived from a variant of the Fibonacci series. Here's the inverse of the golden ratio, phi minus 1. And here's phi itself from the Fibonacci series. Now, if we take the base and then divide by that phi, we get e times 100, close to 4 decimal places. And finally, here's e minus 1. Utterly unsuspected.
Now, if we pause for a moment and consider, well, how relevant how important E minus 1 is. So E minus 1, 1.718281285. This will also bring us a series of connections which interlock with one another. It's not just a disparate series of, pulling things out of air. All these connect. Now, for instance, the Metre pendulum, the royal cubit, and the modern foot, or the so-called modern foot. It's not modern at all. It's at least 2,000 years old, 2,500 years old as a solid fact. That comes from the Salamis stone and the Parthenon era, so around there. Mark Wilson-Jones done some research on there. So again, one of these things where the official establishment has to catch up with unorthodox research in inverted commas. Now, but there's another connection in regards to E minus 1, and it fits in very well with a whole series of, well, basically all my videos in regards to weights and measures, town plans, and how they connect the ancient world to the modern world and how it's been passed on. And so, for instance, the Royal Babylonian foot, which I've been describing in some videos for a while now in regards again to places like Sydney, for instance, Canberra, other parts of the world, but the Great Pyramid itself has another connection to E minus 1. And this is also important to another theme I've been mentioning in regards to the Great Pyramid, is that you need to look at it as a 3D object rather than a two-dimensional object, and there the deeper truth will emerge. And for instance, using that, it's a 3D object, you stand at the corner and there huge amounts of information appear. And for instance, standing at the southwest corner, what you have is 1,718.045 Royal Babylonian feet. And we can see how close, again, this comes to E minus 1, simply multiplied by 1,000, and how it connects to the Royal Egyptian cubit and the foot. Now, this in itself is not a one-off. I'll put the links in the description to the video regarding this, because the pyramid itself has slight variations on each side, which is not a construction error. It is actually encoding a series of perfect, not only proportions, but these proportions also happen in meters. And now, for instance, if you acknowledge the fact that the meter is this ancient unit, you're going to find that pi and phi connections occur. And, well, for instance, the King's Chamber, phi squared times 10 meters, also phi squared times 100 meters. So this proportion of multiples of 1, 10, 100 and 1,000 are riddled throughout the pyramid. The proportions might have been an accident of design, but though these measurements connect, and that they connect repeatedly, and through 1, 10 and multiples of 100, is no coincidence at all. It's part of this larger plan, and once you acknowledge this truth, you can then start looking through, and then you see how multiple other connections feed into one another. It's not just about one coincidence or two or three. It's about multiple coincidences and how they complement each other. And so, for instance, E minus 1. Now, if you're not familiar, you might sort of think, oh, well, now you're minus 1 plus 1, you're going to get all these other stuff. But this in itself is a very important point. So E minus 1. Now, what's considered one of the most beautiful equation in maths is Euler's identity. And here we see how the plus 1 comes into that and makes it, that's one of the really, really important points, what makes it so lovely. But another repeated point of trying to illustrate in my videos is the importance of the synodic and the sidereal month and how they complement one another. So the month we're used to is the synodic month, which is a relationship of Sun, Earth and Moon, as where the sidereal month is a relationship of Earth, Moon and stars. But through geometry and some lovely maths, they complement each other in many, many ways, and the ancient architecture is riddled with these numbers. But there are 12.369 synodic months per year, and there are 13.369 sidereal months per year. Now, because of elliptical orbits, you have to include that. But once again, we have this +1 -1 relationship. So using the strictest numbers here, but there are, depending on the cycle, the time of, within the elliptical nature of things, this comes together even more beautifully. So again, this +1 -1, and so the sun, earth, moon, and the stars, which are again referenced in the pyramid, for instance, the shafts and their alignments, and the various other astronomical alignments and coincidences, once again in inverted commas, E, and here like Euler's identity, but also mentioned is, well, phi and pi. But why phi is again one of the most beautiful numbers in nature, and one of the reasons is because phi -1 is 1 divided by phi. Phi +1 equals phi squared. This only happens with phi. This is why it's in sunflowers. This is why it defines so much of nature. So this -1 +1 is not, you're not just reaching for things. It's again in multiple connections through the cubit, through the foot, through the meter. It pops up over and over again. So we'll get back to the video in a moment shortly, but so yeah, just to illustrate the point, because as we've seen, as phi, E and E -1, phi -1, also phi +1.
And finally, here's E -1. Utterly unsuspected today of being of any special importance, yet to our purpose right now, it's the most profoundly impactful of all 12. Why? Well, here are the two proportions that produce the E -1 ratio, followed by another sequence of proportions in purple. You don't have to do the math, just hold your breath, because the ratios of these proportions are to an incredible 2 5/1000ths of a foot and 4 5/1000ths of a meter. Staggering. So the three most prominent units of measure are found intimately connected to each other in the basic proportions of the pyramid, and in the same place where we found the 12 math constants. Let's put this into perspective on a timeline from the beginning of creation all the way up to the present day. Not to scale, of course, but you get the idea. Here's where Orthodox Egyptology states that the pyramid was built, 4th dynasty, and here's where some of us believe is more realistic, around 13,500 years ago. I want you to ask yourself, which came first, the constants or the pyramid? Well, the very definition of a constant is that it stays the same for all time, right? At the moment creation comes into being, there's duality. The constants must exist. Is the circle's circumference ever going to change in relation to its diameter? No. Okay, the constants came first. So, is it reasonable to conclude the pyramid might have been built precisely as it is in order to preserve knowledge of these important mathematical building blocks of creation? No, not at all, says Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Mankind hadn't even invented the wheel yet, so the Egyptians couldn't possibly have known pi. It's just
sheer luck.
Well, okay, let's grant them that argument. The angle may have been chosen purely by accident, but apparently the blueprint for the three major units of measure, the imperial foot, the royal cubit, and the French meter, is inherent, embedded in the very same proportions. Well, let's ask the same chicken and egg question. Which came first, the units of measure or the pyramid? Now, this is a little trickier. The constants have to precede everything else, but the way in which we measure those constants, that's surely arbitrary. A decision made at some point along the timeline by man himself, no? Well, we know from observation that the pyramid was certainly built with knowledge of the royal cubit, so yes, that unit of measure predates the pyramid. But as we well know, feet came much later, about here, and the meter here. And of course, Egyptologists fight relentlessly over this. They're constrained to answer that the foot and meter came after to preserve their status quo. So what to make of the fact they're all here to such an extraordinary precision? Same answer from the orthodox camp.
Luck.
But is it really? We need to think about this some more. If we reduce the green foot to unity, the red measures 1.718 feet. This is actually the structure of Euler's number E, the ratio 1 to 1.718. And so the cubit is E minus 1. This is the relationship between foot and cubit. Jacob Bernoulli, in 1683, working on compound interest, discovered this formula, the same one that banks use today to calculate the interest we owe on our credit cards. 1 is the amount that we borrow, and if we're compounding at 100% interest continuously, the maximum possible owed on a loan of $1 converges to 1.718, and the total is E, 2.718, and that's the total owed to the bank. This rate of growth is inherently built into creation. It's the natural base of logarithms. The incredible thing is, this implies the foot is synonymous with the principle, the original unity, what we start with. And the cubit, the interest or growth. And it doesn't only apply to banking. It shows up in calculus, probability theory. It's used to predict population growth, or the rate of spread of an epidemic. Its inverse is the rate of radioactive decay. It's everywhere. Newton found the same thing in 1669 with this infinite series of what's called reciprocal factorials. They're on the bottom with the exclamation points. They simply mean 1, 2 times 1, 3 times 2 times 1, etc. to infinity. And this part of the series converges to 1.718, and there's the 1, unity, preceding it, exactly as in Bernoulli's formula. Haven't we always been taught that the foot was based on the average size of a human foot and the cubit on the distance from the point of the index finger to the elbow? And doesn't such an arbitrary choice sound bizarrely unscientific? Especially now that we see beyond doubt they're both based on this mathematically significant relationship, the universal constant of E. So what about the meter? By reducing it by the same ratio to match the unity foot, we discover this meter is the equivalent of 3.281 feet. Now, is there any mathematical connection between it and the cubit? Well, the French derived it from 1/10,000,000th part of the meridian of the polar circumference. At least that's based on the science of geodesy, measuring the actual size of the Earth by the inherent geometry of circles. Perhaps we should look at other reliable, consistent attributes of our planet, like the 12 hours of day and the 12 hours of night that mark the Earth's rotation, or the 12-month seasons of its yearly revolution of the Sun, which gives rise to the 12-month zodiac signs of the constellations, which themselves embody a retrograde pattern far more mysterious to track, but which the ancient Vedic scriptures declare is based on a series of seasons, if you will, that take our planet through an inconceivably long cycle in multiple increments of 1,200 years each.
Now, if we consider the importance of the number 12 and especially the divisions of the 12, so for instance the 12 signs of the zodiac, 12 hours per day, it's one of these numbers that's really, again, just sort of everywhere in so many different ways, but in some very important measurable ways. And for instance, the great year or the precession of the equinoxes. Not only we have the 12 months and the 12 constellations, but this also has to do with this much larger cycle of time, which is the precession of the equinoxes. So for instance, we're leaving the age of Pisces and going into the age of Aquarius. Now, this is not some sort of kumbaya type of thing. This is a bona fide astronomical event, and that's the great year, the precession of the equinoxes. And what that is well, on the spring equinox, the sun will rise, and as the sun's coming up and the stars are fading out, behind the sun there will be a constellation. Now we're leaving Pisces and we're entering Aquarius. So what that means is that as the sun rises on the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, just for the moment, because I'm in the southern hemisphere, so it's a bit different. But what we have is on the spring equinox, the sun will rise, and as the sun rises, the constellation behind the rising sun will be Pisces, or now as we move into Aquarius. So we're in this intermediate period between the two. So this is astronomical. The Air Force, space agencies, it's an important for them as well, and they spend quite a bit of money. There are devoted teams to measuring the equinox and working out the great year, which is roughly 25,920 years. But with so many things, it's being elliptical in nature, the orbits, so that's a little bit each way, so it's not a strict rule. But effectively, it's true. Again, it's whenever it comes to measurement, there's always an acceptable margin of error, and when you're dealing with elliptical orbits and things like this, the margin of error will move in and out through cycles of time. But this division of 12, so for instance, 30 degrees is 1/12 of the circle, and so here you can see. So this is a Templar cross, which gives us this 30-degree division. The 12-pointer star is also an excellent way of drawing the Maltese cross. So we have, as we can see, I've overlaid them both. But so if we draw this circle and we use the Templar cross, it gives a 30-degree division. So we've divided the circle into 12. This will bring us back to the pendulum. We'll bring up in a moment. But back to phi, for instance, so 30 degrees. The arc, which you swing a pendulum to give you this 1 second clock with a 1 meter a 1 meter long pendulum. Well, that's 15 degrees either way, which is another lovely connection to phi, phi squared over 10. Again, times 10 times 100 times 1,000, also in reverse order. But so a 30-degree pendulum, interesting to note. Well, 30 degrees north of the equator, what do we have? We have the ancient city of Heliopolis. It's very often said that the Great Pyramid is 30 degrees north of the equator. Well, it's not exactly 30 degrees north. It's slightly less than that. And an interesting point is that basically the center of the Great Pyramid is pi kilometers, or 6,000 Royal Egyptian cubits, south of 30 degrees north, or Heliopolis, the ancient center of Egyptian mystery school. So 1 meter long pendulum swung within a 30 degree arc will give us a 1 second very, very precise way of measuring the second. There are 86,400 seconds per day. 30 degrees arc of that circle is 0.5236 meters, which is 1 Egyptian royal cubit, as defined by the Great Pyramid, as we've seen earlier. But it's also 0.5236 radian, or 108,000 degrees, which in itself is a lovely number and connects so many proportions of sun, earth, moon, ancient systems of measure. It's just all over the world in some very important pieces of architecture, both modern and ancient. Recently I posted some videos to extend from older videos, but in regards to the Epic of Gilgamesh, for instance, and this is one of the earliest descriptions of the Great Flood. But more so, they describe the preserver of life, or the ark which Utnapishtim built to survive the flood, and give specific measurements and the length it took to build, or the amount of oil and pitch and bitumen that was involved in the construction. All come back to these same sets of numbers. But for instance, the surface area, 86,400 square Babylonian cubits. There are 86,400 seconds per day, but this 864 number will connect to the yugas. It's fundamental in the basic geometry, what's just generally referred to as sacred geometry, but the Vesica Pisces, 864,000. But also sun and moon will be described. But if we look at also New Jerusalem as described in Revelations, it's essentially a retelling of the Ark of Utnapishtim, and the measurements throughout, again, are just the same of these very beautiful harmonic numbers, and again 864 will emerge from that as well. Both the Ark of Utnapishtim, or the Preserver of Life, and New Jerusalem, they're encoding some very important information to do with sets of numbers and measurements, and they also form a beautiful conversion point between multiple sets of measures, not only to bring whole number proportions, but to bring very important symbolic number proportions. But it also, well, it includes the meter. It's at an exact point where we get whole number of meters once more. So again, it's this connection back to feet and meters, which just blends in with so much of these other points. Everything complements one another. It's not a series of separate coincidences pointing at a larger whole. It is actually a series of non-coincidences that point to something which is connected. Each little piece backs each other up, and on multiple levels, multiple forms. It's much larger than just one piece or two pieces. It's a system, it's a method, and it's repeated throughout cultures across the world in architecture. But so the Great Pyramid, okay, we need to have a look at a few details that's not often talked about. And for instance, the pyramid itself sits on something which is called the socle, or the paving stone. So the pyramid has a little bit more height than it is generally referred to at 481.09 feet. But also on each of the corners of the Great Pyramid there is something that's called the sockets. Now, in time, what was there on top of these might have been lost, but the sockets remain there. It's been surveyed. So what we have is that there is a little bit extra height to the pyramid, and there is a little bit extra width provided by the sockets. With that we need to now look at 86,400 seconds per day. We have the added height of the sockets, and we have the added width given to us by the sockets, and the added height by the socle. Okay, so the pyramid is three-dimensional. We need to look at like that. We have to move away from two-dimensional view and the 43,200 number, and we need to embrace that it's three-dimensional and that the proportion is 86,400, because if we use that, multiply the maximum visible base, including the sockets, times 86,400, we get the circumference of the Earth. Only recently might have been improved, but because of tidal bulging of the Earth, we're talking effectively 100% accuracy, or 99.99999%, and even satellite measurements have this margin of error built into them. They're not 100% perfect in themselves, and it's also when and where you measure. Keep in mind again, 86,400 seconds per day, the pendulum which connects the Royal Egyptian cubit and the meter, and this number 86,400. The height of the pyramid, including the socle or the paving stones, multiply that by 86,400, and we get the polar diameter of the Earth. The Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's slightly flattened at the top, and that's a very important point for map makers and navigators. So again, it's pointing to something larger, something bigger than the whole, and each, in inverted commas, coincidence comes together and again complements each other piece. And so the Great Pyramid, it's a three-dimensional object. 43,200 is nice to describe the northern hemisphere of the Earth, but it's rather inelegant because you have to use a bird's eye view, then a side view. If you use the pendulum, the meter, and the cubit, and the pyramid being three-dimensional, you get something much more elegant.
Which the ancient Vedic scriptures declare is based on a series of seasons, if you will, that take our planet through an inconceivably long cycle in multiple increments of 1,200 years each for the Iron Age, 2 times 1,200 each for the Bronze, 3 times 1200 each for the Silver Age, 4 times 1200 each for the Golden Age, and which altogether constitutes Plato's great year, a cycle of 12,000 years ascending and 12,000 years descending. The question is, do we see a reflection of such patterns anywhere here in the meter-cubit relationship? Well, if we take a circle of radius 1 meter, its circumference is 12 cubits. So 1 cubit is exactly this portion of the arc, 1/6 of a slice of pi, or pi over 6, just the way we measure angles in radians. Pi over 6 is 0.5236. If we take the cubit in feet and divide by the meter in feet, it's precisely the same. Beautiful, yes? Let's take the whole thing now. Make foot, cubit, meter the radius of our circle. The circumference now is 12 pi feet. That's to an astounding 99.9993% accuracy. Or look at just cubit meter as the radius. Let's stretch this here. That's now 10 pi feet circumference. In fact, when we make the cubit be the perfect e minus 1 meter, the perfect pi over 6, which works out to this little formula here, and the foot is perfect unity, the inherent mathematical perfection is in there between foot and cubit e, between cubit and meter pi, and it produces this. Cubit meter is exactly 5 feet, all but for a minuscule 0.00004 feet. That's to an incredible accuracy of 2/50,000th of a foot. To put that into perspective, it's roughly the size of a human red blood cell. And of course that means that all three combined is 6 feet. Now, the numbers 5 and 6 are found everywhere in sacred geometry. 5 representing the microcosm of the normal everyday life we experience on Earth, 6 representing the macrocosm, the state of being we associate with divine wisdom or our reconnection with God. And how does man attain this state? Simply by recognizing the presence of the One, the original unity, out of which the...
Now if we consider the 6/5 ratio, again, Albrecht Dürer and so many others of these masters in regards to esoteric knowledge and the geometry regarding this is very important. It's a very lovely point, the geometry of it, but there's also, again, another series of connections which will complement this. So earlier I mentioned how the Royal Babylonian scale of measures, the Ark of, or the Preserver of Life, the Ark of Utnapishtim and New Jerusalem encode these proportions, and how the BARDCODE himself has done some wonderful work in regards to how it's also been passed on through Shakespeare, and I highly recommend you go have a look at his work. I'll put the link to his channel in the description for this video, but there are also others. Please watch them. But in regards to this particular proportion and how New Jerusalem, the Ark of Utnapishtim, the pyramid itself, form something of a conversion tool, a point at where multiple measures are harmonized at very beautiful, very specific points, which themselves connect to so many things such as phi and many other lovely points. But 6/5, so the ratio of the Mohenjo-Daro foot from the ancient Indus civilization and the Royal Babylonian cubit form a 6/5 ratio. The Royal Babylonian foot and the long foot, which is also the Persian foot, but the long foot, as used, some speculate, in Stonehenge phase 1, is at a 6/5 ratio once more. Is very important also in ancient Mesopotamian weights, but staying with that for the Great Pyramid, the visible part of the pyramid is in comparison to the subterranean portion of the pyramid is a ratio of 6/5. And Robin Heath has mentioned this as well, so I need to credit him in regards to this point, is the sacred Jewish cubit and the Egyptian royal cubit also is a ratio of 6/5. So again, once more, these various ancient legends, this ancient architecture which is being used in the New World, in the modern time, all of this complements one another, and it's through the weights and measures. So, for instance, the meter and the second, the cubit and the second, and the meter and the Great Pyramid
of
itself.
The one, the original unity, out of which the five of earthly existence has grown. So we see there's a stunning spiritual metaphor playing out here in this trinity of the world's predominant measuring systems. Foot, cubit, meter, simultaneously and cumulatively representing three different stages of growth. The foot, original unity, is mathematically connected to the cubit. Together they literally are the universal growth constant, E. The cubit, the actual amount that unity has increased, E minus 1, by growing into creation according to mathematical linear law, also grows according to mathematical circular law, intimately connecting to the meter. A perfect division of what we might call the universal cycles constant. One slice of that 12 pattern we see in all planetary growth, precisely pi over 6. Finally, the meter cubit combined doubles back onto foot in what we might call the universal 6-5 constant. It represents the ultimate spiritual growth. If you doubt such a bold statement, check out the short video on this same YouTube channel. It's called CPAK Addendum 1, Spirit Molecules. We have to really wrap our minds around this or we can easily miss it. The units of measure, the very constructs with which we've defined the constants over thousands of years in completely different cultures, turn out to be a constant themselves. 3 in 1, and directly connected to 12, there's that number again, of the world's most important constants, carved in stone, immortalized next to each other in the Great Pyramid. It rightfully deserves the name Universal Constant of Measure. And it's not surprising it has remained unknown for so long because, think about it, the world has used a combination of imperial units, feet, and the French metric system for over 2 centuries. No one saw the connection between 1 foot and 3.281 feet. Because the missing link, where the pure mathematical connection to each resides, is the biblical royal cubit, which we haven't used for millennia. So it's clear now these later dates cannot be attributed to their original discovery. These must be the rediscovery of a previous perfection. They have to predate the design and construction of the pyramid, possibly here, during the last golden age, maybe even here. It begins to look as though the units of measure are maybe as eternal as the constants themselves. So was the Great Pyramid built with prior knowledge of this mystical fact? Well, the mathematical precision of the pyramid can't be argued away as sheer luck anymore, so the Egyptologists will be forced to revert to their last bastion of retreat, their mantra of denial. Evolution doesn't happen in predictable cycles like all the other time-related patterns. It's linear. Ape, caveman, to brilliant us. It's simply not possible for the pyramid to be older than stated, because how could inferior man ever even build it? But that's where they're trapped, because exactly, how could such a sublime, perfect repository of ancient wisdom be created by, well, dumb and dumber? As for the monkeys, I was Davy Jones's musical director for 12 years, and I never once saw him whip out a slide rule. And modern man? Forget it. We couldn't do this. We still today don't know the existence of this foot-cubit-meter connection. So where does that leave us? No one on this timeline could have done it. The only alternative is builders of a far superior intelligence at a time that we have absolutely no knowledge of. Prehistory. Yet still, this being the only possible solution, it will, as always, be vehemently resisted. It is indeed difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Upton Sinclair. We have again, like so many truth-seekers on this ancient knowledge quest, proven prior knowledge, and it will not be accepted. Because there is still that infinitesimally slim possibility that it is all, well, say it with me,
Sheer luck.
the most incredible coincidence. And why? Because there's no physical, tangible proof. A parchment, a document, something stating specifically every single detail of all that you've just seen. If we had that, the very existence of such a holy grail of a document could mean only one thing, that the otherwise unknowable knowledge it contained had been passed down from prehistory by human transmission, secretly guarded and zealously protected over countless centuries. It's just plain common sense. Such beings of superior intelligence knew that by building the Great Pyramid, its very presence would guarantee that great minds in the future would eventually focus on it accordingly and retrieve its deepest messages. But they'd also use every other means at their disposal to transmit the knowledge through secret initiatory ritual as an additional safety net, another conduit to assure survival of the sacred wisdom. Does it matter what name they went by? Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Freemasons? Maybe we will never know the precise intricacies of the transmission, but we know enough to realize it would have been attempted. The question is, did it get through? Because if so, the discovery of just one physical document detailing such knowledge would be the ultimate incontestable proof. Game over. Well, such a document does exist. It is irrefutably genuine. I have worked for over 6 years with the most accurate digital copies of this document. In fact, everything you have seen in this presentation was discovered first in the document. It will be revealed at the 2016 Conference on Precession and Ancient Knowledge. It's just
Sheer luck.
With that, I'll say thank you for watching. I'll put the link in the description to the BARDCODE channel. Please watch his videos. You can follow the links on his channel and his videos to his website and some other very amazing information in regards to how this particular set of knowledge has been passed on through dangerous times in some of the most unlikely places. I'll also put in the description, please follow the links to some other related videos, for instance longer versions regarding New Jerusalem, the Ark of Utnapishtim, and some other Great Pyramid videos where I'm showed through my research some very other interesting, very important, some very lovely connections. And with that, have a good one.
It's just
Sheer luck.